At Dogfish Head, we rely on the goodness of Mother Nature to provide us with the beautiful and bountiful culinary ingredients used in both our off-center beverages and dishes at our restaurants. Mariah and I wanted to learn more in real time with the real people on the ground doing the work, addressing the environmental issues facing us globally, and on a localized level along Dogfish's backyard, the eastern seaboard. We reached out to our longtime partners at the Nature Conservancy for help, knowing their mission is centered around conserving the lands and waters on which all life depends. The very same lands and waters on which all the natural ingredients in the stuff we make comes from. So we decided to take a road trip from Miami to Maine to learn about the diverse and critical conservation efforts happening every day. We spoke to local environmental experts and explored Mother Nature's splendors. So buckle up and ride along on our Mother Nature Let's Do This road trip. All right, Mariah, you ready?
Let's do this.
Yeah. And let's talk about where we are right now, your office. Where are we?
So we are at the C&O Canal National Historical Park, and this is a partner site for the Nature Conservancy with the National Park Service. We own this part of this island called Bear Island, the home of the very famous Billy Goat Trail, and we're in a collaborative relationship with the National Park Service to balance the needs of the rare plants and animals that live here with the hundreds of thousands of visitors that this trail sees annually.
And we have Virginia on the far bank of where we're sitting.
So the people that you see there are in McLean, Virginia,
Right.
and we're in Potomac, Maryland.
To me, it feels like we're closer to Yellowstone than Washington, D.C. right now, but we're 10 miles from the nation's capital where we're sitting, right?
Yeah.
So is that, how many folks come and visit this park annually?
The National Park Service estimates that before COVID, about 500,000 a year, more since COVID, because people feel safe outdoors. So the Park Service is, like all land managers, having challenges with the increased influx of visitors during this time.
And that is most likely due to people wanting to get out in Mother Nature and unplug. And so, what are the activities that are bringing people out here? I mean, we saw, it almost looked like a nature Olympics as we came down this rappellers and kayakers, but what are the most popular?
So as we were walking down the towpath to here, we saw people walking their dogs, we saw people jogging, we saw people walking their strollers, we saw bikers, we've got rappellers on the sharp cliffs on the Virginia side. Pre-COVID, people would come to enjoy the little museum in the visitor center that has a lot of great historical displays.
And then we also had kayakers, and it looked pretty technical, didn't it?
The rapids up there, and I can barely stand to watch because I'm afraid somebody's going to hurt themselves. The kayaking is popular and legitimate here, both in the rapids of Great Falls and in the more flat part of the river here. I've even seen stand-up paddleboarders on this part of the river. The source of the Potomac River is a little spring in West Virginia, which is in our beautiful Appalachian Mountains. And Appalachian Mountains are one of the Nature Conservancy's 4 global focal areas, along with the Amazon, Borneo, and Kenya in Eastern Africa. So these are areas of global significance that the Nature Conservancy is focused on for the coming decades. So when the Nature Conservancy first got involved in this area through a gift of land by the local power company, the National Park Service was already very well established here. C&O Canal National Historical Park had been operating for many years. But as we've discussed, there are many different kinds of park users, many different constituencies, and the park was trying to serve all those constituencies. The Nature Conservancy focused very sharply on habitat, biological diversity, protection of nature, was able to bring a new perspective to the Park Service and convened a group of local partners, C&O Canal Park on this side, Great Falls Park on that side, Riverbend Park, other partners, to pull everybody together to talk about why this area was important to those various organizations, who were the stakeholders, how can we continue to keep this area precious for all of them. The perspective that the Conservancy brought to the table was ecology and biology. Because
there's such unique life and plants and animals that are native to this area.
Right, and some of them endemic to this area, meaning they thrive here, but they're not found even nearby. In areas where the microhabitat and the climate and the soils are different. We want this area to be as awesome 500 years from now as it is today.
It's awesome to be here with you. Tell us your full name and your title.
Likewise, Sam. Thank you for having me.
Psyched for today.
Mark Breyer with the Nature Conservancy. I direct our Chesapeake Bay program.
And you've been with the Nature Conservancy for
25 years.
Happy 25th. Dogfish is 26 years old, so I admire
about the
you
same time.
and your journey. What got you into this career and marching towards your work with the Nature Conservancy?
Yeah, it's really all about water for me, Sam. There's something really magical about water, including as a key ingredient to what we're drinking right here.
The human body's mostly water, the earth is mostly water, beer is mostly water. It's not a coincidence.
It's not a coincidence.
It's not a coincidence. But and now the jacket you're wearing today talks about both food and water.
Right.
Can you talk about the work TNC does?
Yeah.
A little bit on the land side before we spend most of our time on the sea.
Sure. So there's a clear connection there. If you think about it, we're on the banks of the Chesapeake here, and so much of the land use that people occupy in the Chesapeake region and really around the world is agriculture. It's about growing food. And the key piece of that for the Nature Conservancy is how can we do that and not have a major impact on the environment, particularly on the water. There are so many good opportunities everywhere where we work, everywhere where people are, to grow food in more sustainable, more regenerative ways. There's this new word called regenerative.
Yeah, we visited a regenerative farmer on our trip.
Did.
So
what I love about this term is it's not just leaving things as good as you found them, it's actually making them better than you found them. And it's actually a good segue into the work with oysters, because oyster farmers actually do that. They find parts of the Chesapeake or other areas and actually make it better by adding more and more and more oysters to the water.
But in the last few years, there have been a few incidents that have tremendously impacted the resurgence of the oyster industry, specifically here in the Chesapeake. Maybe walk us through the incredible levels of rain in 2018, what that did to the local oyster industry, and then into COVID, and then let's talk about the work the TNC responded to that.
Yeah. Probably connected to climate change, massive freshwater rains coming into the bay, and oysters need some salt. They need at least a little bit of salt, if not a lot of salt. Yeah. So the industry lost a lot that year. Then on the heels of that, as they were starting to come back and really see the potential resurgence, we have a pandemic, an outbreak, that essentially shutters most of their marketplace.
Yeah. So for breweries, where usually 30 to 40% of your sales are in draft beer, not can or bottle.
Correct.
Dried up overnight with COVID as all the restaurants closed down. I imagine it was even a bigger percentage for oyster fishermen.
Our understanding is it was at least 80% loss of their sales, which is just heartbreaking and dramatic, particularly on the heels of what had happened the year before. So at the Nature Conservancy, we were fortunate. At that time, we started thinking, because this industry, oyster farming, is sustainable, is regenerative, and such an important part of the overall restoration effort, both trying to build back native reefs, but also just bring back more oysters to the Chesapeake and the East Coast. What can we do to support that? Yeah. Phase one is this idea, what can we give sort of a short-term injection into the industry to help financially and help with some recovery. Phase two is looking longer term. The industry is emerging in many different ways. We want to make sure that industry is as resilient as it can be moving into the future. So the second part of the SOAR program is really about resiliency grants, funding innovation in marketplace and technology and different practices that will allow farmers in the future to weather storms like the pandemic. Yeah. On the heels of that decision not to introduce the non-native oyster, the partners, nonprofit, state governments, federal agencies committed to restore 10 of these tributaries of the dozens and dozens of tributaries in the Chesapeake Bay by 2025. One of the very few success stories I think you could say on the planet. We're actually going to hit that mark by 2025, maybe earlier.
Wow. So what would you define as success for each of those 10 tributaries?
Right. So what we're trying to do is restore about half of the oysters that we think were there naturally. And I should just pause and say, this is the largest restoration effort for oysters on the planet.
Is it really?
We have had people come from China, Australia, Germany, to visit the Chesapeake and say, how are you, this partnership, and it's really, the Nature Conservancy is one of many partners. Yeah. How are you as a partnership pulling together and figuring out how to do something at this scale?
It's encouraging stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, It's amazing, beautiful work that you're doing, Mark.
Cheers.
And we're so thankful that you guys are doing
and
it.
Likewise to you.
So cheers. Let's go have a couple oysters.
Right. Let's do
and
it.
some beers.
I'm Scott Budden. I'm a partner here at Orchard Point Oyster Company.
Yep.
I'm one of 2 other partners, Brian Connolly and Hal McBee.
Nice.
And yeah, we're at the nursery right now.
So it accelerates the best nutrients they could possibly have, getting to them to help accelerate growth.
You got it. It's like a 24/7 like force feeding system almost, because oysters are passive feeders. They sit there with their gills open and they're opportunistic eaters, and as algae passes by, that's what they consume. So if you're in a higher flow environment like this with a pump actually moving water through them, they're going to eat very, very quickly and as fast as they can and grow really fast. So we'll go and check out the next step here, which is actually in the water.
Nice.
So we're standing on what's called a floating upwell or a flupsy, Sam, and then this is basically a system that's very similar to the upweller tanks, but instead of moving water horizontally and vertically, we move it just horizontally here. You can do more volume with the flupsy is the idea, and it's a little cheaper electricity cost because you're already sitting in the water and moving water horizontally versus bringing it up a little bit ahead.
Without pumps. Right.
And then they'll go up the floating cages in the Chester River. And up in Chester, where we have, believe it or not, about 680 of these floats up there.
So why isn't everyone converting to floating versus bottom?
The big reason why people aren't making the switch is, one, because of aesthetics. You know, you could argue that people don't want to necessarily look at this, but believe it or not, it took 5 years to get this small area because of opposition.
Probably opportunity for education too, right? With teaching people how good oysters are for the environment, for the water. To say, well, you want clean water? Let us have this along.
Yeah, the more oysters are here, the better the water quality. The better water quality, it helps with the resale value of the home and all that fun stuff.
And if they're fishermen, doesn't it help with the fisheries as well?
Absolutely. Yeah, the Coastal Conservation Association are big supporters of oyster farming because of the structure that it provides. The ideal ratio for half-shell oysters is 3-2-1.
What's that?
The golden ratio: 3 inches long, 2 inches wide, 1 inch deep. Okay. Yeah, so that's what you're kind of going for, is something like that. And the reason why we're able to achieve such a consistency, I mean, for the most part, you see a lot of very similar looking shells because they are being grown suspended. And so when they're in those bags, they're doing this, they're micro colliding into each other. And it's doing the job of what the tumbler would do. Instead of running, burning gas or powering that thing with electric, we're able to actually use the wind and the fetch to do the same job. And it does a better job, like Mother Nature tends to do. So it's in kind of an ingenious way to cut on your labor. And, you know, it does a good job of keeping that shell. You can feel it's got some density to it. It makes it easier to shuck. You kind of come into it with the lens of you're a farmer and you're affected by the environment, but until you actually live through it, it's somewhat theoretical. And we surely had to do that with 2018 and all the rain we had here, the highest rainfall on record on the East Coast, in human history at least, or at least recording history. And it definitely crushed our supply side to a degree we didn't anticipate. We expected 2018 and beyond to be really strong as far as what we were putting in. We put 12.5 million oysters in the water over the course of 3 years leading up to that. And then all of a sudden 2019 rolls around. It's a decent supply side year. Everything's growing great. We have a lot of beautiful oysters. And then bam, right into 2020 with the pandemic. So having a program like SOAR offered to growers and industry was really big, because you're at a point where you're just scrambling to sell every oyster for whatever you can get as far as money goes. And here comes a group that has some funding that you don't have access to, and it's for a different goal. It's actually, this business, you sell the oysters, you make the money, and that model, you sell the oysters for restoration, you make some money. So it was a great way to offload some supply that had gotten out of control. It wasn't so suitable for the half-shell market. It's way bigger than some of the restoration oysters they get spat on shell. They're all single oysters, all 2.5 inches and up. So, they're going to survive, they're going to thrive is the hope. They're going to grow really fast because they're farmed oysters. It's been great.
Incredible. So now we got to taste the fruits of your labor here, right?
Yeah, man.
And when you say it's quintessentially, Chesapeake, what are the markers of distinction from a sensory perspective of a Chesapeake oyster, say, compared to a Pacific oyster?
Absolutely. So, a Chesapeake oyster is going to have that balance, that's that little bit of brine up front, and then it's going to go to a sweetness, and then it's going to finish on like a very buttery note, or it should, if it's a good oyster from the Chesapeake. It's going to be different than, say, some of the stuff maybe you saw in Maine, where it's very brine forward, and a lot of times, some of the coastal bay oysters or just seaside oysters, they're very just briny, and that's good. And some people love that, and they only love briny oysters. Some people like more of a sweet and balanced oyster. So it's kind of like wine or beer, where you find what you like, and sometimes
sensory press. Cheers.
Sometimes a mixed platter is the way to go too. So you get that little bit of salt up front, it lingers, and then the sweetness and the butteriness and creamy finish throughout.
You're good at what you do, Scott. Really good.
Likewise, man.
Cheers.
Cheers.
That's good. So this is the part of the day, Scott. It's awesome to have a guest for this part of the day because usually it's just Mariah and I, but we get to like think of a moment that we really loved about what we learned on that day's adventure. For me, it would be that I passed the almost like parkour physical challenges of getting to the boat and helping you undock and go over to the beautiful floats where you're raising the oysters. What would be your favorite part of the day?
Mine would probably be breaking bread and sharing our products. I mean, I hadn't had the hazy IPA before today, and I'm not the always biggest IPA fan, but this thing was killer. And pairing this with these oysters, I mean, it's two great products with a lot of passion, and that's nice to see from the people that work at it.
Nice. Mariah?
I think my favorite part of the day was picking up an oyster like this and going,
Wait, that just happened! That's in real time favorite part of the day. That's never been done before. And it's appropriate that we're pairing it with Sea Quench. Because look at, that's like the natural partner, right? Citrus. So I don't know when that started, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know if it was like a scurvy cure or like a way to, sanitize the oyster, but I mean, it's good with lemon. You want a little on yours?
Yeah. And so Sea Quench Ale not only made with citrus, both regular lime juice and black limes, but made with sea salts harvested from the shoreline of Maine and from the mouth of the body of water that we are looking out at right here. So couldn't be a more appropriate tasting.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Do
cheers.
One,
cheers.
double one
cheers.
of this.
Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers.
So good.
And you pick up a little of that salt from the beer and the oyster.
And the oyster.
Mm-hmm.
So good.
Nice. So the best part about a good little oyster occasion or party is that when you're done, especially when you live near the Chesapeake or on the Chesapeake, you give the shells back to the bay. It helps, and hopefully the idea is that, just like the SOAR program, there's going to be wild oysters that strike on that shell, make its own little mini reef. We actually find plenty of wild oysters in here, so that's the goal, is to always give back.
We're here in the South Wilmington Wetlands Park. We're happy to partner with the City of Wilmington and a whole group of great partners to look at developing a solution for a flooding problem here in South Wilmington, and to, instead of maybe going a hard engineering route, we helped provide technical assistance and partnership building and fundraising capacity to develop this great green infrastructure. And it's an awesome project because it helps solve that flooding problem as we're getting more and more flooding due to climate change, and it also brings in all these other benefits for people and nature right here in the middle of the city. The Delaware River watershed and the entire East Coast actually is part of the Atlantic Flyway, so migratory birds migrate every year from South America and the Caribbean up along the Atlantic coast, and they have to stop over somewhere, and they will stop in cities, in Delaware, all along the river, and so having these kinds of habitats along the riverway is really important for those species as well as people. We saw red-winged blackbirds today. We saw some killdeer, which are actually a shorebird over there in one of the restoration areas. We've got great white egrets flying around, great blue herons. We saw some of those ducks and geese hanging out together. I think this will be very popular with those kinds of waterfowl. So yeah, we got a lot of different species here. It's great. But the plants, so restoring the native vegetation helps this park hold that water during those flood events, but it also provides habitat for all kinds of insects, which then supports the birds and the fish and the other species in here.
So cool, and you can think of just a person taking a walk from that neighborhood, or a biker coming through for the city just to, decouple for the day. They don't have to have everything in their mind that went into this project.
No, they can just
enjoy the view.
can just relax, come in, not have to deal with the stress of having their neighborhoods flooding a couple times a year, and then to be able to come out here and connect with nature. It's really important. We think about all the services that nature provides to us, but yeah, that mental health piece of being able to connect with nature wherever you are is really important, I think.
Anyone that lives in the neighborhood or anyone that's visiting Wilmington can access this park by foot or by bike and just see the nature beauty literally in the shadows of the city behind it, right?
That's right. We're this trail we're standing on will have gateways at the east and west ends. There'll be a small parking lot on the west end, and there'll be an additional trail that'll head through this part of the wetland that'll go over to a large parking lot at the field house for visitors. So this trail is sort of connected to an existing set of sidewalks and bike trails, and it's going to be a great way for people from inside the city and from outside of the city to come and view our wetland.
Yeah, it's been amazing watching just Wilmington transform itself with leaders like you having the vision to make it not just a very livable city, but a very outdoorsy city as well, right?
Yeah, you know, that's important. It's an important amenity to residents and to business. You know, what we're hearing from businesses is that the workforce and the talent that they need to run their businesses, that demographic values open space, biking and walking. It's important for our communities to have access to green spaces, so there's a lot of good reasons to do what we're doing. Yep.
So check out dogfish.com to learn more about the Mother Nature Let's Do This program and project and how you can get involved. Cheers.